Nullscape is a game that has a lot of threats for the player. This includes things like enemies, curses, and sometimes even other players. Most games may use early game enemies as a guide, like what the player should be doing for the rest of that game. Nullscape doesn't do this. The early game enemies are more like permanent foundations for what the player expects. Yes, I'm calling Mart a foundation for the game's enemy design. Why? Well, let's find out.
Schmark. You need to explain some other things first.
Oh, right. Thank you, Mike. So before we move on, what is an early game enemy? My definition of an early game enemy is an enemy that shows up in the 3 podium choices in intermission before you reach level 5. In other words, all the enemies that you're able to pick from level 1. I also want to specify this is not a guide. This is a video on the game design of Nullscape's enemies. It's probably a playlist, so if you're coming from a time where those future videos are out, check them out. Last thing, I will refer to every enemy by either its pronouns or they/them pronouns. Yup, your boy is woke. Holy flip. Mike, is that it?
Yeah, I'll read the enemy name now. Mart.
Mart is a very simple enemy. It has no collision and goes towards the closest player. When it touches that player, blam! They die. So what could I possibly say about such a simple enemy design? Well, maybe the expectations will come from Mart, but from what could spiral from it. The thing about Nullscape is that you're going to very likely pick the enemy more than once. Mart is one of, if not, the best example of stacking. What do I mean by this? There's actually 2 ways that stacking shows up. The first way is naturally picking more Marts. If they get close together, they merge, making them become bigger and faster. This makes them an ever-increasing threat, even in the late game due to the second reason, progression events. These are events that happen once you reach a specific level. There's a progression event on level 6, 12, 18, 24, and 30 that makes Mart spawn bigger by default. Due to Mart getting faster the bigger it is, this also naturally increases how fast it moves towards a player. Mart is one of the prime examples of a permanent foundational enemy. When you first see it as a new player, you'd think, oh, he's slow and easy to avoid. This guy must be the obvious pick every time. But as you learn how progression events work, how its merging mechanic works, and how fast and big it can become, that's when you realize it's not the easiest enemy in the game. Okay, I'm glazing Mart like he's the final boss of the game, but no. It's still relatively simple if you navigate around it correctly and have priority on survivability. However, that's not my point. My point is that Mart shows that the player needs to leave room for others and not just purely stack. It also shows the consequences of early game choices and how they can spiral into late game danger.
Bell.
If you touch Bell, it flings you upwards and creates a visual distortion. If you touch Bell 3 times, it gives you an effect where the next time you touch a Bell, it kills you. Bell should be a very interesting enemy because to a new player, it's kind of a good guy. Bell can't kill you until very obvious sound cues tell you that it's going to. So this tells to the player that Bell isn't that bad. However, they start to learn new things. First, I want to talk about movement and positioning. Since Bell flings you upwards, you can use it like a jump pad. However, many other games have shown that jump pads aren't always good. Bell shows that a player can get out of a sticky situation if they use it right. However, it can also show to the player that it can stop their momentum, it can distract them, and lastly, bother others? When a bell is rung, the distortion visual affects everyone, not just the player that rung it. This shows to other players, oh shit, the actions of others can have consequences with me in it. Bell is the first obvious indicator that others can be harmed. This is called PvPcape. Players get from Bell that it can be helpful in situations like where you're getting cornered by too many enemies, but it can also be harmful by distracting others, thus decreasing their survivability. In other words, Bell can help you, but it can harm others. Just like Mart, this shows to players that this game has more consequences than what meets the eye.
ICBM.
You see, bringing up Bell first was very intentional. Bell to players is a glimpse of PvPcape, but it isn't that bad to begin with. ICBM is the direct version of PvPcape. ICBMs lock onto a player and then falls onto them, exploding once it reaches the location. However, this explosion deals an area of damage. This means if any other player is in that area, they will also die. This shows to players that they should be navigating around other players. If a person has an enemy, like ICBM, that is going to attack them, then they should be wary of anyone coming towards them, or vice versa, them going to someone else. This is a pretty short section, yes, but that's because ICBM is confirming the consequences that PvPcape can have. it isn't as nice about it as Bell is. Players don't just see teammates as helpers, rather, they see them as something they need to account for.
Husk.
Husk is the simplest of the simplest. I'd argue that they're simpler than Mart. Husk spawns in the place of the player and starts to follow them. If the player touches Husk, then they die. To put it simply, Husk is the positioning enemy. The player can no longer stand still, they need to constantly keep moving. Actions that were easy to do, such as turning around, now require you to move around Husk or jump over them. What I'm trying to say is Husk punishes players that don't have safe routes. Before, you were able to stay still for a second and think where you could possibly go. Husk doesn't allow for that. They pressure you into thinking of routes on the go. As a matter of fact, Husk is a pretty annoying pick even for pro players. This forces there to be no safe zones, no moments where you're not pressured. You have to constantly keep going and entering an area that's far from where the gifts are at. To players, Husk teaches positioning and the consequences of pressure. Instead of acting on actions you thought of more thoroughly, you act on actions due to pressure. In other words, it's worse to start thinking after the danger is already on your tail.
Baby.
Baby is yet again another enemy that can end up being on your tail constantly. Baby gives a warning on where and when it's going to move, and dashes that direction. If the player touches Baby, they die. Baby is interesting because it's kind of a mixed bag of a bunch of other things. Has the ever-looming threat of Husk, but also the direct PvPscape of ICBM. Baby will constantly be on the player, making him have to come up with on-the-go routes and never feeling safe. However, there is one major difference. Husk can only be seen by the player, while Baby is a threat seen by everybody. Baby attacks the closest player. This means that if player 1 gets too close to player 2, and player 1 keeps moving, Baby could potentially lock onto player 2. This shows the player how much they need to take their teammates into account. Actually, I'd say it's Bell tenfold. It makes them question, should I move around my teammate and keep Baby? Or should I try to go past them to go through an area more easily? In turn, now they have to handle with Baby. This takes a lot of player skill into account. Let's say you did it intentionally, now you're relying on that teammate to handle Baby, and if they can't do it or mess up, then that's a dead player. This gives a lot of room for the emotions of a player. They can think selfishly, selflessly, confidently, or just worried in general. What do those add up to? Responsibility. That's what Baby does. It's a responsibility that the players can pass around like hot potato. Hi, you reached the end of the video. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I enjoyed thinking of how the game was potentially designed. I love these enemies and they all do a good job.
What about Springer?
Oh, Springer. Listen, the best I can give it is to watch where you're going. Though this isn't even that great since every other enemy requires you to watch where you're going. Even better than an enemy, trip mines. Those are literally designed to make you be careful. So, sorry Springer fans, this horse has no place in this video, but I do know something that has a place in my channel. You! If you subscribe, like how Pursuer's doing, you can become a very valuable subscriber, since you're subscribing for my Nlescape content. If you want to help me get out of Danny's World YouTuber hell, then subscribe. Like the video as well, so I can actually be motivated to finish this mini-series. Hype the video if you're on mobile, I need more Nlescape players to see this. Thank you.